Hello, my name is Maddie Bayshore, and for my second part of my Sport Around the World project, I chose to research and talk about the Rugby World Cup. This tournament is competed by both men and women, and while the tournaments have similar histories, for simplicity's sake, I will be focusing on the women's tournament. The Women's Rugby World Cup developed out of the Men's Rugby World Cup. The first men's tournament took place in 1987, and the second one was set to take place in 1991 in France and the United Kingdom. The women's tournament was viewed as an opportunity to help grow women's rugby in particular, but women's sport in the larger picture. The photo on the right side of the screen is Deborah Griffin, one of the women instrumental in creating the Women's Rugby World Cup. She was charged with chairing the organizing committee for the first Women's Rugby World Cup. She enlisted the help of three of her teammates, Alice Cooper, Sue Dorrington, and Mary Forsworth, to help create the tournament. These four women worked around the clock to build the tournament infrastructure from scratch, and this set the foundation for the tournaments that followed. Before I talk more about the first Women's Rugby World Cup, I wanted to add a little more information about the Rugby World Cup and Rugby Union. Rugby World Cup is one of the world's most popular sports brands and is the top rugby union tournament for men and women. The tournament is contested by the best international teams, and 12 teams have competed at the event. Rugby union consists of 15 players per side on the pitch, playing two 40-minute halves with a 10-minute halftime. It should also be mentioned that in 2019, the international governing body for rugby, World Rugby, announced the men's and women's tournaments will be called the Rugby World Cup. The two tournaments were previously known as Rugby World Cup and Women's Rugby World Cup. The first Women's Rugby World Cup took place in 1991 in Cardiff, Wales. This event was not approved or supported by the International Rugby Board, later known as World Rugby, but the tournament still proceeded. 12 nations competed at the first Rugby World Cup, and these nations consisted of New Zealand, Canada, Wales, France, Sweden, Japan, the United States, the Netherlands, the Soviet Union, England, Spain, and Italy. These teams were divided into four pools of 3 teams, and the top team from each pool moved to the semifinals. The first semifinal saw the United States beat New Zealand 7-0, while England beat France 13-0 in the second semifinal. This saw the United States and England pitted against each other for the final. After the first half, England led the United States 6-3. However, England could not stop the United States as the nation scored 16 unanswered points to win the match 19-6. This earned the United States the first Rugby World Cup trophy, as well as the first and last major rugby trophy for the nation since the 1924 Olympics. The image on this slide is of Team USA following the final. Now to answer the question of who oversees the Rugby World Cup. The answer to this question is World Rugby. According to the organization's website, World Rugby is an international federation and global movement comprising of more than 500 million fans and 10 million players within 128 national member federations. The organization is also recognized by the IOC, which allows rugby to be a part of the Olympic program. However, that is a tournament for another time. World Rugby's flagship program is the Men's and Women's Rugby World Cup. This tournament is the driving force behind rugby's significant growth. Additionally, each nation has a national governing body for rugby who works with World Rugby to host events and promote the sport. Some of these national governing bodies include New Zealand Rugby for New Zealand, the Football Rugby Union in England, and finally USA Rugby in the United States. The Women's Rugby World Cup has been competed every 4 years since 1991. The exceptions to this are 1994 and 2017. The 1994 tournament was pushed forward a year into 1994 to avoid conflict with the 1995 Men's Rugby World Cup. The event in Ireland took place in 2017 rather than 2018 due to World Rugby wanting to change the rotation of the event to eliminate conflict with the Commonwealth Games and Women's Rugby World Cup Sevens. As with other international competitions, host nations place bids before being selected by the international governing body. In the case of the Women's Rugby World Cup, World Rugby determines who hosts. The chart on the right side of the screen shows the hosts of the previous 8 events as well as the host for this year's event. Though it should be noted the 2021 World Cup in New Zealand will be played in 2022 due to the pandemic. Most of the tournaments have taken place in Europe, where rugby is one of the more popular sports. Canada and New Zealand are the only countries outside of Europe to host. Finally, the location for the next Rugby World Cup in 2025 is yet to be released. However, England is putting in a strong bid to host. The profile of participants for the Rugby World Cup is difficult to confirm. Most athletes who participate in the Rugby World Cup do not earn enough income to survive by just playing rugby, so they are required to get another job. This unfortunately is fairly standard for female athletes who want to compete on an international level. The athletes that do participate in the tournament mostly play in semi-professional clubs in their respective nations or abroad. Some nations, including the United States and Canada, pool athletes from college and university to fill out their rosters. Finally, some national programs award full-time contracts to the 15 players. England announced they would do so in 2018, and several other nations are following suit. Now continuing to the spectators, the global rugby fan base is at 405 million following the 2019 Rugby World Cup. Additionally, it seems more men tuned into the Rugby World Cup than women. However, the number of women engaging in the tournament is increasing. The number of women partaking in the Rugby World Cup is expected to grow in the following years. Now, if we look at the graphic to the right, it is easy to see most viewers of the Rugby World Cup are from Europe. This could be due to a number of reasons, the most obvious being the fact rugby is one of the more popular sports in the region. The second and third regions, viewership-wise, are North America and Australasia. The regions rounding out the order are Africa and the Middle East and South America. Rugby has not yet gotten a strong hold on these regions, so these numbers make sense. Until the 2017 Rugby World Cup, media coverage of the event had been lackluster. The 2017 Rugby World Cup in Ireland increased the media coverage for the event, but also women's rugby in general. According to World Rugby, the 2017 Rugby World Cup had a total of 45 million video views while having a total reach of more than 70 million people throughout the tournament. Finally, the 2017 Rugby World Cup saw the largest TV audience ever for a Women's Rugby World Cup finals when 2.65 million people tuned into ITV1 in the UK. Continuing to present day, for the 2021 Rugby World Cup in New Zealand, World Rugby has launched this program called World Rugby Media Zone. This is a program people can subscribe to free of charge to find all World Rugby and tournament-related news and media content. This includes press releases, video news releases, statistics, photographs, and commentary notes. There is a section within the program specifically for Rugby World Cups to help increase media coverage of the event. It was difficult to find specific sponsorship information for the Women's Rugby World Cup, as the men's tournament brings the most sponsors. It should also be noted the Men's Rugby World Cup experiences such large financial success, both monetary and sponsorship-wise, that World Rugby is able to invest in development of other events and programs. This could explain why the Women's Rugby World Cup has fewer sponsors. However, the Rugby World Cup has official suppliers, one being Tador, a watch company based out of Switzerland, and Gilbert Rugby, a sports equipment manufacturer. Both of these organizations also supply kit and other essentials to the event. World Rugby has also specifically brought MasterCard on as a sponsor for women's rugby specifically. This is a 5-year-long partnership that makes MasterCard the first worldwide partner for the Rugby World Cup 2021. This sponsorship is also opening the door for larger sponsorships to happen for the Rugby World Cup. In the past, licensing and merchandising programs focused solely on World Cup tournaments. The licensing programs of the past would be specifically for the Rugby World Cup of that year, and then once the event is finished, the licensing program ended. This changed in 2017 when World Rugby appointed IMG, an international sports and entertainment agency, to manage the organization's global licensing and merchandising rights. IMG's primary focus will be on the men's and women's Rugby World Cup. However, the organization will also create licensing and merchandising programs for the World Rugby U20 Championships and the World Rugby brand itself. The hope is World Rugby will be able to create a continuity between all of these events that previously didn't exist. I wanted to finish this presentation with some interesting facts and tidbits I found about the Rugby World Cup. First, the New Zealand Black Ferns are the most successful team at the Rugby World Cup. The team has won the title on all 5 occasions they reached the final. These years include 1998, 2002, 2006, 2010, and 2017. Additionally, England has only missed the final 1 year, in 1998, when they finished third. However, they have only won the whole tournament twice, first time in 1994 and the second time in 2014. Along with this, only 3 different nations have won the title: New Zealand, England, and the United States in 1991. Finally, the next Rugby World Cup was supposed to be played this year in New Zealand. However, it is now going to be played in October of 2022. Thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you learned more about the Rugby World Cup. If you found this information interesting, I suggest tuning into the 2021 Rugby World Cup to be played in 2022 next year, or even looking up some games on YouTube. World Rugby has several games, including the final from the 2017 Rugby World Cup, on their YouTube channel. The following slides contain the references I used for this project. Finally, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.